Ella had always lived a life of quiet resilience. At 34, she worked as a waitress in a modest café downtown, serving steaming cups of coffee and sweet pastries to hurried office workers and distracted students. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. She had learned early that life rarely handed out kindness, especially to women who dared to dream beyond the limits society set for them. That afternoon, the café was unusually calm. Rain pattered against the windows, turning the city streets into a blur of umbrellas and headlights. Ella moved gracefully between tables, her notepad balanced perfectly in her hand, taking orders with polite efficiency. Then he arrived, Alexander Vale. The name alone carried weight: billionaire, entrepreneur, and media sensation. He was known for his ruthless business deals, his opulent lifestyle, and a certain arrogance that made people both fear and admire him. He walked in as if the world itself had cleared a path for him, tailored suit, confident stride, and that faint smirk that suggested he always got what he wanted. Ella's heart skipped a beat, but only for a moment. She had learned long ago not to be intimidated by wealth or titles. She approached his table with a professional smile. "Good afternoon, sir. What can I get for you today?" Alexander leaned back in his chair, scanning the menu like he was bored by it. "Coffee, black, and," he said with a mischievous grin, "while you're at it, give me some financial advice, just for fun. I want to see what someone like you thinks about money." The café seemed to hush around them. Regulars paused mid-sip, staff slowed in their movements, sensing a peculiar tension. Alexander chuckled lightly, expecting a nervous giggle or a flustered response. But Ella did something completely unexpected. She looked him squarely in the eyes. There was no hesitation, no pretense. Her voice was steady, confident. "Don't trust the ones who call themselves kings while stepping on others to get there," she said. The words hung in the air like a sudden storm. Alexander froze, a flash of surprise crossing his face. She wasn't scared. She wasn't impressed by his wealth or power. She was looking at him with clarity, with an unspoken challenge that left him momentarily speechless. It was a simple sentence, but it carried weight, the kind of weight that makes someone stop and question everything they believed about themselves. Alexander, used to having control over conversations and people, felt an unfamiliar curiosity mixed with a hint of humility. Ella returned to her work as if nothing had happened, jotting down a note for his coffee, but inside she felt a flicker of something unexpected, possibility. A spark had been lit. Little did Alexander know that casual café encounter and her single, fearless statement had set into motion a game he would never forget, and a woman he had underestimated would soon change everything. Alexander returned to the café the next day, and the day after that. At first, it was casual curiosity, a wealthy man intrigued by an unexpected spark of intelligence in a waitress. But soon his visits became deliberate, almost ritualistic. He asked small questions at first. What would you do with $1 million? Or how would you invest in a failing company? Each time, Ella answered with calm precision, never offering more than a hint of her true knowledge. She noticed the way his eyes lingered on her, not with lust or fleeting interest, but with something deeper, genuine fascination. He was accustomed to people nodding in awe or fear, but Ella didn't bend. She held her ground, and it unnerved him in the most tantalizing way. Outside the café, whispers began to circulate. Alexander Vale has a mysterious new advisor. People said. She's always at his side, taking notes, giving advice. But no one knew the truth. Ella wasn't seeking fame, power, or wealth. At least, not the kind he could offer. She had her own plan, one born from years of careful saving, strategic thinking, and quiet observation. Ella had a secret account, funded slowly over time from tips, part-time work, and shrewd investments she made quietly. It wasn't enough to buy yachts or mansions, but it was her leverage. It represented independence and control, the tools she needed to turn tables when the moment was right. Alexander finally made his move. One evening, after weeks of conversation, he leaned across the table, his usual confidence softening into genuine respect. "I want you to work for me," he said. "Just 1 year. You'll see the world of finance, deals, and opportunities most people only dream of, and I'll pay you more than you've ever imagined." Ella paused, pretending to weigh his offer. She smiled politely, as if she were tempted, and allowed him a moment of victory. But inside, she was calculating. She knew exactly what she would do, exactly how she would play this. Her past had taught her patience and cunning. She had been betrayed once before by family she trusted, by advisors who promised loyalty, by a world that seemed to favor the ruthless. But she had survived, and now Alexander Vale's arrogance would give her the perfect stage for a reckoning. "Yes," she said finally, her voice calm and deliberate. "I'll do it. 1 year." Alexander's smile widened, confident that he had won her over. But he had no idea that by underestimating her, by treating her as a charming novelty rather than a force to be reckoned with, he had just signed the contract for his own humbling. Ella left the café that night with a quiet sense of satisfaction. She was stepping into his world, but on her terms. She would learn, observe, and wait. The betrayal she had endured in her life had given her skills no money could buy, and soon she would show Alexander that brilliance, patience, and courage could outmatch even the most arrogant of billionaires. Working for Alexander Vale was nothing like Ella had expected. The world behind the glass walls of his skyscraper was dazzling, intoxicating, and dangerous. She saw the power he wielded, the deals, the contracts, the whispered negotiations where millions changed hands with the flick of a pen. She watched him command boardrooms, charm investors, and navigate treacherous partnerships with a confidence that was almost hypnotic. Yet, beneath the surface of his brilliance, Ella began to notice cracks. There was arrogance in his victories, carelessness in his oversight, and an unshakable belief that no one could outthink him. Alexander trusted her, shared insights he would never reveal to anyone else, and laughed with a vulnerability that few had ever seen. It was intoxicating, and it was the opening she needed. Ella learned quickly, absorbing everything with quiet precision. Every report, every subtle hesitation from his associates, every misstep he dismissed as inconsequential, she filed away in her mind like a master strategist. She was patient, meticulous, and always calculating. Outside, she maintained the calm, obedient persona of the helpful assistant. But inside, she was preparing for the moment when her patience would pay off. One evening, Alexander bragged about a trust fund loophole he had discovered years ago, assuming no one outside his circle could ever take advantage of it. Ella listened intently, nodding, her expression polite and neutral. "That's clever," she said softly, not betraying the storm of excitement brewing inside her. She knew the significance of what he had just revealed. She also knew it was dangerous to act too soon. Timing was everything. Acting too early could expose her intentions. Waiting too long might lose the perfect opportunity. She had learned the art of observation from past betrayals, how to spot weaknesses, how to exploit them without anyone suspecting, how to wield patience as a weapon. The day-to-day interactions with Alexander were a delicate dance. She laughed at his jokes, mirrored his moods, and occasionally challenged him just enough to keep his interest. He admired her intelligence and subtle assertiveness, but he had no idea that the very qualities he found captivating were the ones that would soon turn his world upside down. Behind the facade of loyalty, Ella's mind was always 2 steps ahead. Every deal, every meeting, every confident declaration by Alexander became another piece of the puzzle she was quietly assembling. And while he believed he was mentoring her, he was unknowingly providing the tools for his own unraveling. The betrayal, when it came, would not be impulsive or cruel. It would be precise, elegant, and devastating. And Ella, who had survived the betrayals of her past, would finally have the sweet, satisfying reckoning she had long imagined, crafted not from anger, but from patience, strategy, and an unyielding sense of justice. For now she waited, smiling politely as Alexander spoke, all the while knowing that the storm she had been quietly preparing was closer than he could ever imagine. The boardroom was buzzing with anticipation. Alexander Vale sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, exuding his usual confidence. Investors, executives, and legal advisors filled the room, all ready for his usual display of charisma and control. He leaned back, smirking slightly, convinced that everything was exactly as he had planned. Ella entered quietly, carrying her tablet and a composed smile. To everyone else, she was the diligent assistant who had worked by Alexander's side for months, absorbing knowledge, taking notes, and offering occasional insights. No one suspected the storm she carried within her. She began her presentation with impeccable professionalism, reviewing reports and highlighting minor oversights in the company's accounts. Alexander listened, nodding, certain he could manage any small correction. But Ella's observations were not minor. Every chart, every transaction, she pointed out, revealed mismanaged funds, undiscovered loopholes, and unclaimed assets. Each revelation was backed by meticulous evidence, precise and undeniable. The room grew tense. Whispers fluttered across the table. Alexander's confident smirk faltered as he processed the implications. The very loopholes he had boasted about, the details he had assumed only he could navigate, were now laid bare by the woman he had underestimated. Ella's calm voice carried through the silence. "These aren't mistakes," she said evenly. "They're vulnerabilities, and if left unchecked, they could cost the company millions, or worse, everything you've built here." Alexander stared at her, momentarily speechless. He realized with a mixture of awe and apprehension that the woman he had laughed at in a café months ago, the waitress who had dared to challenge him, had orchestrated this entire revelation. She had quietly learned his empire, understood its intricacies, and waited for the perfect moment to demonstrate her brilliance. He wanted to speak, to assert control, but Ella continued, walking the board through every detail with unshakable confidence. By the time she finished, the room was filled with a new respect for her intellect and strategy. Alexander was left silent, not with anger, but with the humbling recognition that he had underestimated someone capable of far more than he had imagined. When the meeting concluded, Ella collected her things. She looked at Alexander once more, her calm smile betraying nothing of triumph or malice. She didn't need to gloat, her victory was already complete. She had claimed the respect, the independence, and the quiet power she had longed for, all without compromising her integrity. As she walked out of the boardroom, she felt a surge of freedom. Alexander Vale, the billionaire who had once thought himself untouchable, would carry the memory of that day forever. Not as a humiliation, but as a lesson. Brilliance, patience, and courage always outshine arrogance. Outside, the city hummed with life. Ella stepped onto the street, her heart light, her mind clear, and her future firmly in her hands. The joke that had begun in a cafe months ago had turned into a masterful plan of subtle revenge. And for the first time in her life, she smiled without fear, knowing that she had not only survived, but triumphed.